What does your retirement look like? Are you confident you're on the right track? Navigating fluctuating markets alone can be confusing. Stocks, bonds, annuities, 401ks, and IRAs. Get ready to be informed and empowered by financial experts Joe Anderson and Alan Clopine. They'll simplify the process and give you the tools and strategies you need to map out the retirement you're dreaming of. Put their decades of experience to work for you. From Social Security to tax planning, they'll take the stress out of investing in your future. On Your Money, Your Wealth.
Here's the deal. When you look at people, right now, over the next 6 months to 24 months, according to Fidelity, over half of us, 60%, are extremely concerned about their finances and their job security. But what about their health, their loved ones? The past, 4 months have been absolutely extraordinary, and now is the time to really take a look at your finances so you don't make those emotional mistakes. Let's say you want to spend $60,000, and I would encourage all of you to do this because this will help you make better decisions. It will give you more confidence, especially in times like this when you invest. Bear with me. Let's say if you want to spend $60,000 per year, and you have a fixed income source, so Social Security and pensions. Maybe that brings in 40. So you're going to be short roughly about $20,000 that needs to come from an overall portfolio, right? And let's say you're a diligent saver and you've saved about $550,000 per year. So the first step of a financial plan to make sure that you can have the income that you need with the assets that you've built is you do some math. You divide that shortfall by the amount of money that you've accumulated. So if I do this math, that's about 3.6% distribution. But then you have to add in some inflation. If you look at a historic inflation rate, it's about 2%. So you add those two together. So my expected return of what I would like to do to give me the income that I need plus inflation is roughly around 6%, right? So then you want to start constructing a portfolio that will get you that 6%. It's not going to happen every single year, but a lot of you are trying to build a portfolio that will give you, let's say, a hypothetical 8 or 10% rate of return, which is way too much risk once you start taking distributions from the portfolio. So Al, I think people just do a little bit of math, then they can start realizing, hey, you know what? I don't need to shoot for the moon here. I can be a little bit more conservative in my portfolio to accomplish my goals.
Well, that's right, Joe. And I think one of the first questions we get is what can I make? You know, how much can I make? And that's not the right question. The question is what I need, what do I need, and then what kind of portfolio should I have to be able to obtain that? And again, in retirement, safety is everything. Now, if you need more than about 6%, it may be a little bit much. So you may need to cut expenses or downsize or get some part-time income.
Even in the worst cases in market history, things recover. Let's take a look at the Great Depression back in the 30s. If your stock allocation stayed invested, you would have made 367% over a 5-year period. Or how about a recession back in the 80s, 267%. And then here recently with the Great Recession, 178, almost 200% over a 5-year time period. So I understand things get scary when markets get volatile, right? But you have to make sure that you have the right plan in place.
It is a volatile market. People really do get afraid, and when we're fearful, we tend to sell, don't we? Because we don't want to lose our portfolio.
Well, sure. I mean, you see your account balance dropping by the thousands. And especially as people get closer to live off of those assets, I mean, that's human nature. When a train comes towards you,
you try to step out of the way.
You try to step out of the way, and that fear steps in. And this is from our buddy Carl Richards, right? So when you look at here, this is when we buy when markets are high because everything is good. You look at the news, it's like, well, nothing can go wrong. Right? But then all of a sudden the market starts tanking, and then all we do is watch the news, and all you hear is this bad news. It's crazy, so we get fearful, and then we sell. And then the market recovers, and then it's like, oh, I guess everything is good again, so then we purchase. This is a great recipe to go broke, but we consistently do this all the time because of our emotions. That's why having a game plan is so key, and making sure that you understand that markets will move, markets will be volatile. But the biggest, I guess the problem is that this time will be different now. This time will be different. And you feed all of the news from the media, and I don't blame people for doing this.
Yes, and part of the reason, Joe, why this happens is because, and there's been many studies that sort of prove this out, is that the fear that we feel is probably twice as much as the elation that we feel when markets go up. So when markets go down, we're twice as fearful. The emotion is twice as strong as when markets go up. And Joe Carl, I think, does a good job with that as well.
Yeah, I mean, we're twice as fearful to lose $1 than we are to gain $1.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
We don't necessarily want to lose. Making money is great, but losing money hurts twice as bad.
Right.
And that's why there's this behavior gap, because there's an investment return, right? What is the overall market doing? What is your mutual fund doing? And then what are you doing, or what is your actual rate of return in regards to the portfolio? Dalbar does a study. If you've watched the show any amount of time, we've shown you the studies that the investment return of the overall investment is significantly higher than the investor's return. There's a certain dollar figure that people need to accomplish to provide the same lifestyle that they're accustomed to. But there's a gap of what they actually have and what they need. A bigger problem is that there's a gap of what they need and what they think they need. So if you look, the gap is rising. In 2015, there was a $28 trillion gap in regards to a shortfall of overall assets for retirees going into retirement to have a similar lifestyle. If I look at 2020, now it's almost 140. We have to find a bridge to get the gap covered. This is a very cool chart here. I helped my sister when she first got her job as a nurse, and I ran something similar to this. I said, as soon as you get your first paycheck, save a couple of bucks, because if you wait 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, 10 years, you're gonna have to save so much more money. Marley starts to save at age 35. His sister starts to save at age 45, right? So let's say they start at $7,000 per year. They have close to $700,000 at retirement. Beatrix, right, she waited, she was procrastinating. Oh, there's other things that I want to spend my money on, whatever. But now she wants to catch up. She needs to save almost double. She does save over double, $15,000 per year, and she still has less money. So the sooner that you can start saving, the better.
Yeah, there's no question. I mean, we all know sooner is better. But I think, Joe, in a lot of cases, people, they come to us and they're age 50 and they haven't done anything. And we would tell you, start. If you're 65 and haven't done anything, start. It's never too late to put yourself in a better position.
Absolutely. And I think the starting point is just developing a foundation, a financial plan, some simple things that we can all do.
The best way to determine your stock versus bond allocation is 100 minus your age rule of thumb. Joe, true or false?
To me, this is probably the stupidest thing that I've ever heard in the financial planning world.
I agree with you.
The rule of 100 is saying, okay, well, let's say I'm 45 years of age. You take your age minus 100 or 100 minus your age, and then that's going to tell you how much money that you have in stocks versus bonds. So at age 65 minus 100, 65. So 35% of your overall allocation should be subject to risk, and the other should be safe money. Don't do this. If someone is pitching you this, this is such elementary BS. You want to make sure that you have a portfolio that's very specific to your cash flow needs. Your age has some portion of the overall equation, but Al and I, we have clients that are in their 80s and 90s where 100% of their assets are going to grandchildren. Right, so they have if we did the rule of 100 at 80, their grandchildren's portfolio would be 100% bond, 80% bonds. It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, you have to be a little smarter than this rule of thumb. And in fact, at one point they said, well, since this doesn't really work anymore, let's take 120 minus your age. That still doesn't work. It's your own situation. Figure out what your goals are, what rate of return that you need based upon your goals, what you're trying to accomplish, and then you work backwards to try to figure out what investments are going to make sense for you to generate that rate of return. And generally, we recommend you have the safest portfolio possible to earn that rate of return. Why take more risk than you need to take?
So if I have a lot of money sitting in these tax-deferred accounts that are going to be subject to ordinary income tax, maybe I'm not going to deplete the entire account before I die, then the kids will benefit, right? They'll get some assets, but they're going to get creamed in taxes because all of this will have to be distributed out in a lot shorter time period that will pop them up into a higher bracket. So what are some ideas and strategies that you might want to take a look at? Well, if tax rates are at all-time lows, just understand where you fall. What is your taxable income, right? And then maybe you max out your bracket each year. And how do you increase your overall income? Is by taking money out of a tax-deferred account. So if I take money out of a tax-deferred account, it creates income. But if I can pay taxes at a lot lower rate, it might behoove me to do this. But where do I put it? So I want to take some distributions out here. I know I have to pay the tax later, or my kids are going to have to pay the tax. What should I do with the money? Well, it might make sense to put it up here into a tax-free account such as a Roth IRA. I know if you've watched the show once, it kind of seems like the same show every week, because we talk about this because it is such a key component to, I think, an overall tax strategy. You are taking the unknown out of existence by putting it up here and to have forever tax-free growth. So I think with the elimination of the stretch, the fact that a lot of retirees have most of their liquid assets here, Al, in this, right, it's that big. We need to get this thing that big, right? Let's move that up.
Yeah,
right?
we want that one.
We want this one big, but it's all right here. There's $24 trillion sitting in these accounts, and there's a few dollars sitting here.
Yeah, we like, Joe, we like to call that tax diversification, which just simply means you got money in all three pools, and then you can control your taxes better in retirement.
Individual investors have a very hard time of keeping a standard investment portfolio or investment policy statement. Because here's an individual investor, and here's the S&P 500. Okay, so if I look at the average stock investor over the last year is down about 9%, but the S&P is only down 4%, right? If I go out 10 years, the S&P is up 13, the average investor is only up 9. If I go out 30 years, 10% versus 4. So if I just invest in the S&P 500, I'm going to get superior returns than the average equity investor. Why is that? Is because the simple mistakes that we're making with our money cause us tens, if not hundreds, and some of you millions of dollars over your lifetime. Let's break this thing down. Let's stop making these mistakes. And to help us, let's bring in the big man.
There's probably 30, 40, 50 different mistakes that people are making consistently, but I think you can kind of boil them down into 5 mistakes that we're going to go over today. One is procrastination, starting in the first place. That's one of the biggest ones. A lot of people fail to start. Another one is investing without a plan. Diversification, making sure you have some of each kind of asset class. You want to make sure that you're not making emotional mistakes. This is probably one of the biggest ones, and this is what Joe just went over, which is you buy and you sell at the wrong times. We want to go over this. And then finally, not controlling fees and taxes. And Joe, I think there's a lot to be said about saving for retirement and what your retirement should look like and what your goals are. But a lot of people they keep making these mistakes over and over again.
Let's look at this real quickly. Real simple steps to make sure that you can have a very good retirement is that Al already talked about it. Picking a retirement date, you got to start somewhere, right? If I want to travel, you have to have a destination. So this is just a good starting point. I want to retire at 65, 70, 62, whatever your number is, start there. Then you can see if you're on track or not. You also have to consider your longevity. But then here, what is the lifestyle? Because now you're using leverage here that you can toggle, right? Hey, maybe I want to spend $150,000 a year. Maybe it's $30,000 a year, okay? And then you got to check the math and then adjust, right? So let's kind of run a quick example, Big Al. Let's see, to help people do this at home.
So let's say you're 62 and you want to retire in, say, 3 years. So that's age 65. Okay, so we have a date there. Longevity, let's say you feel like you're kind of in average health, so we're going to go to that 50 percentile, so that's age 92. Then you got to look at your spending. Now this will take a little bit of work, right? But in our example, Joe, $75,000 is the spending, but $40,000 is needed from investments.
Yeah, and what you will need to do there is just take a look, in a guesstimate of what you're currently spending, but then you look at your fixed income. And why we say, hey, I want to spend 75, but I only need 40, is because this person has Social Security. Maybe you have a pension. Maybe you have real estate income. Maybe you have other ancillary incomes that are coming in from other sources.
And let's say you come up with $500,000. So I want to spend 40, and I got 500,000. So we do a little math. We divide 40 into 500. We get 8%. We want this to be 4% or less, so 8% just simply doesn't work. So Joe, then you kind of have to go to work and maybe adjust 1 or 3 here.
Right. So you could, A, smoke a lot of cigarettes, right? And so you could...
True, that's one way to go.
So your retirement age, right? So I want to retire at 65. Well, you know what? Maybe you have to retire at 67, 68, okay? And then 75,000, maybe that's a little bit rich. Can you reduce that? Right? $500,000 is what my nest egg is. Hey, is there a way that I'm going to work 3 more years so I can save 3 more years of savings, right? And increase that, let that continue to grow. Your Social Security is going to be a little bit larger because you push that out. So it's just basically starting with this, right? To see if it's feasible. And then the second step is just kind of shaking things up to see how the math is going to connect. So if you look at this chart here, let's say your benefit is at $2,000 per month, hypothetically, and if you claimed it at 62, you'd receive $1,500. And if you waited until age 70, you would receive $2,600. So then you're like, oh, what's that break even? We don't look at it this way. We don't think Social Security is an investment. It's an income stream. It's longevity insurance that's given to us by the government. I guess, giving our money back to us in a form of a retirement income check. But let's say if your life expectancy is 80, okay? Well, if I took it at 62, I'm going to get about 350 grand out of the system. Not bad. If I take it at full retirement age, 360. So 340 to 360, it's a couple of bucks. But if I wait till 316, so I lose here. Right? Because if I have shorter life expectancy, I only really have, 10 years if I waited to age 70, right? If I have a longer life expectancy, okay, well at 2,000, I'm going to receive $600 or 600,000 out of the system. At 70, it's 630, right? Or 522. So it's going to make sense for us to push this off. And where's life expectancy going, right? We're living a lot longer. And you know, you look at this kind of chart here, is that, well, the break even, if you really want to know what that break even is, I guess depends on the assumptions, Al, is what? Maybe age 80, 81?
80-ish is usually the break even, Joe. And I think it's important to realize that when you're thinking about the highest benefit, we just talked about when you can afford to wait and have the highest wage earner wait maybe to age 70, then there's a higher benefit for whoever the survivor is. And right now we know statistically that a married couple age 65, one of the married couple, 50% chance is going to live to age 92. That's the current stats. With advances in medical advances, that will probably be stretched out further. So yeah, Joe, we really don't really think of this as an investment, as you said. It's more like longevity insurance, because we are living so much longer. So let's talk about investments. So when you're thinking about investments in a Roth IRA or regular IRA, typically people put stocks and bonds, mutual funds, ETFs, index funds. That would be the most common. But that's not the only way and only thing you can invest in. You can set up what's called a self-directed IRA, and you can put things like real estate, precious metals, cryptocurrencies, things of that sort.
Yeah, we get this as like, well, what does a Roth IRA pay?
Right. Yeah, right, exactly. I went to my bank and they said they're paying 1%, so I don't want a Roth. They're no good.
Yeah, or my Roth IRA is no good because I've lost money in my Roth IRA. Just understand that the Roth or the IRA is just a shell. Then you can invest in basically anything that you want besides collectibles and insurance. Right? That's about it. So if you like CDs or if you like mutual funds or stocks, if you want to buy Amazon, right? Hit $2 trillion market value. Let's do that. You can do that inside these retirement accounts. So just understand that it's a shell that allows you to either take a tax deduction, let it grow tax deferred, and then when you pull the money out, it's taxable. Or you can avoid or disallow, or another word is just to don't take the deduction and then let it grow tax free. So that would be a Roth. So it's the opportunity is endless. It's just really understanding the rules.
Yeah, and I think we get this question all the time: is should I own real estate in my IRA or my Roth IRA? In many cases, in most cases, we say that's not necessarily the best approach. There's a lot of reasons why. You have to take a required minimum distribution. You may not have cash to do it. There's no step up in basis when you pass away. You don't get depreciation deductions. So I'm not saying it's terrible. I'm just saying it's not necessarily the best.
What if I told you that people are retiring at the age of 20 30, 40. You'd think I'm crazy, right? No, people are actually doing this, retiring in their 20s, finding this financial independence. You know what it's called? It's called FIRE. 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 Financial independence, retire early. It is amazing what these people are doing. And that is today's FIRE Financial Focus.
So let's go over the basic mathematics and how to do this. So the first thing you do is you start with your expenses. Take a look at what you're spending right now. And if you're retiring before age 65, like a lot of younger people want to do, you're going to have to add health care, because if you have health care added, paid for by your employer, and if you're no longer working, you're going to have to pay for that. So your expenses plus health care. So that's one factor. The other factor is, what's your take-home pay? You know, you may be making $50,000 a year, $100,000 a year, but that's not what you're receiving. You might have money going into 401k, or you might have obviously have taxes, so your net take-home pay. And then you just take a look at an example, Joe, and I think it's kind of neat the way that they do this.
Yeah, let's say if my take-home pay, what my paycheck is $90,000. Start taking a look at your expenses. In this example, let's say the expenses are $40,000 and they can save everything else at 50 grand. All right, now your savings rate is 56% of your take home. And if I'm spending only $40,000, 14.2 years is my financial independence day. 14.2 years. So if I go back here, $90,000 is my take-home pay, $40,000 is my expenses. You go to the chart, and I'll tell you, if I could save this, right, with simple assumptions here, is that my financial independence day is in 14 years. If I could save a little bit more, it's going to be 13 years, 12 years, 10 years, and so on.
So Joe, it's a little bit different a way of looking at this. It's kind of the same concepts that we talk about as far as retiring, but instead of trying to figure out what age you want to retire, it's kind of the opposite. It's like, okay, what am I spending? What am I currently making? How much can I save? And how many years and months is it going to take to get there? And when you look at this chart, Joe, I mean, it can be anywhere between 5 years and 50 years, depending upon your spending and your savings.
Right. I think too, Al, is that if someone has just a simple plan like this, is that, you know what, if I do this, I can accomplish the goal in this time period. A lot of us just throw money at our 401k plans with no real rhyme or reason, right? But if they have an end goal in saying, you know what, if I do this appropriately, I can finally achieve this financial independence, or I don't have to work. Work is optional, even though I still might want to work. Guess what? If you go into work on Monday and you have a pile of money sitting in your bank account, guess what? Work isn't that bad. I remember a few years ago, and it's like Warren Buffett, right? He's one of the richest people in the world, and they were like, you know what? Warren Buffett pays a lower tax rate than his secretary. And then you're thinking, how could that be? Warren Buffett is a multi-billionaire. Well, it's because most of his assets are capital assets. So this is stocks, bonds, businesses, real estate. It's not necessarily a retirement account, right? I'm sure he has a 401k plan. I have no idea. But most of his assets are outside of the retirement account, and they're capital assets. And they have a special tax treatment. So if you're in a lower tax bracket, the 10 or 12%, you sell a stock or bond up to that level, guess what? You don't pay any tax at all. So it's very tax favored, right? Especially for lower income individuals. If you make a little bit more income, the capital gains rate is only 15%. And then if you're at the highest income level, then that's where it gets a little bit more expensive, but it's still 20%. In L, it's always been lower than ordinary income.
It has, with very few exceptions, Joe. And a capital asset, so you're right, that's anything outside of retirement. Think of that as a capital asset, but you have to own it for at least a year, right, to get the long-term capital gain treatment. And you can net capital gains with losses. So that simply means if you have a gain and a loss, you can net those two together. And so because of that, you want to take a look at strategies like tax loss harvesting.
Yeah, take a look at this, folks. So let's just say that you have a stock, right, and you buy it at about $22 per share, and then it goes up to about $30 a share. Then it drops to about $17 a share. So your basis is really, let's just call it 22, and it drops to 17. So you have a $5 loss here. So this is a loss that you can write off on your tax return. So, you know, it's almost the opposite of what you should be thinking in regards to tax planning, because we would recommend potentially selling that asset. And then you're like, what are you talking about? Why would I sell when it's down? Right? That's the last thing I want to do. Yes, it's not sell and go into cash. It's sell this investment and buy something similar. Right? So let's say if you have a mutual fund that has large companies in it, you could sell that and buy something similar. It can't be identical, but you still want to be in the stock market. So you sell mutual fund A, you buy mutual fund B, now you have this loss. And so when the market then recovers, and if you need to create income or sell it to purchase something else, you have that loss that offsets that gain dollar for dollar. Let's talk about the book. Yeah. We got Ignore the Hype, Financial Strategies Beyond the Media-Driven Mayhem. I mean, the media drives a lot of people to do different things, right? Talk about it. What's going on? What can people learn when they get the book?
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to acknowledge we're on TV talking about ignoring the media. So ignore most of the media, don't ignore your money or wealth. That's the first thing, right? Sure. But the other part of it is, the news gets paid, right? It's the 24-hour news cycle, and it's the idea that there's all these outlets, whether it's on TV or online, that need to attract eyeballs. They throw stuff up at the wall to see what sticks, and you know what? A boring report on the latest economic number doesn't drive eyeballs. It's sensationalist, right? It's ESG, frankly, right? A rapper can sound really exciting. The reality is very different. So the point of the book is, first of all, to make people aware of that and really reinforce how much absurdity there is out there in the media, and that one of the best things they can do is to turn off a lot of it. But then, two, is to convince them that there is a path to success that doesn't involve competing with large institutions. Because I think that we're in a world where institutional investors have a lot of inherent advantages, but so do individuals. And if you can drown out the noise and take an approach that focuses on advantages instead of some of the trying to compete with somebody from Goldman Sachs or some huge hedge fund that has computers and PhDs and resources, that's a loser's game, but there's a winner's game out there and a path to success if people choose to take it.
Absolutely. It's a great book, great read, quick, easy, fun. If you like this kind of stuff, I guess. And if you're watching this, you love this kind of stuff. Get your copy right now. Go to yourmoneyyourwealth.com. Yourmoneyyourwealth.com. I'm not sure how many copies that we have. Hopefully you are a lucky winner, since we are, these are just advanced copies. I think I got the first one. And I'm going to have Brian sign it right after the show. 93% of investors believe that the presidential election will have an impact on the stock market. 93, almost all of us believe this, that no matter who gets in, right? If it's blue or if it's red, we believe that will have some impact on the overall markets. Almost another 100%, 84% says whoever gets elected will change their investing habits. When you look at history, the market is the market. The market is almost across the board. If a Democrat's in office or if a Republican's in office, it's almost identical for the long-term perspective.
Yeah. I think a lot of it comes down to kind of the perception of the party, right? That the Republicans are sometimes perceived as lower tax, less regulation, which those two things are seen as being pro-economic growth or pro-business, whereas Democrats sometimes have more of an eye towards societal goods, maybe a little bit more business regulation, maybe slightly higher taxes on some in order to pay for some of the social programs. And so that's seen as more business on-friendly. But again, the reality is we've had long stretches of decades and decades on end where the Democrats controlled Senate. We had many years of Democrats in the White House, and the economy and markets did just fine. I mean, back under President Obama, right? I mean, people have different views on how he ran the country and stuff, but if you just look at the financial markets, they did fantastic.
Looking at what moves should people make, I think I read a study that about 50% of people coming up to the election are going to switch their investments. If I were to switch my investments, how would I do it?
I think that the biggest key there would be, if you are going to switch your investments, do it in a measured way. Don't make wholesale changes. That's the biggest difference between institutions and individuals, right? Institutions have an asset allocation that they're targeting. Maybe it's 50-50 stocks, just to make that up, stocks and bonds. And if they want to make a change, they go to 46% stocks or 55% stocks. They do it in a measured way, and then if they're right, it helps. But if they're wrong, it doesn't destroy their future performance. Individuals all too often are prone to these wholesale shifts where it's, let me go from 50% stocks, I'm moving into cash, right? And then if the market takes off, they never catch up because it's like a train leaving the station. And the second is that psychologically, it's really hard once you're in cash to get back into the market either way, right? Because if what you feared comes to pass, you're afraid still. If the market's gone up, well, now it's too expensive.
Hopefully your retirement account is not, just whip it down the field and pray that you catch it. But there are some strategies for those of you that are a little bit behind that need to get caught up, and like catch-up contributions is one of them. You know, there's few levers, Al, that people can do, and it really makes a giant impact on their overall financial situation.
Yeah, saving more is obviously a lever, and spending less is another lever. So when you're over 50, you can put more dollars, $6,000 more into your 401k, or another $1,000 into your IRA. Another one, Joe, is timing, right? Delaying your retirement. Wouldn't it be great in a football game, you're down to 3 seconds and you could add another 3 minutes on the clock? That would be awesome.
Right, I mean, you would probably win a lot more.
A ton more, right?
Hey, I want another quarter, you know?
You decide when you want to finish the game, then you'd win almost every time, right? Delaying your retirement makes a big difference because you're saving longer, right? So that helps. You're not spending your retirement dollars. You can postpone your Social Security a little bit longer. There's a lot of good things for delaying.
Yeah, because or you could work part-time too. You know, so let's say if you're spending $100,000 a year, that's your goal. And I'm just using that number because it's simple math. And your Social Security is bringing in $50,000 as a family, so you're short 50 grand. It's like, all right, well, I was making $100,000 in my job, but maybe you could work part-time and make $30,000 or $25,000. So your distribution rate on your assets is a lot less maybe for your first 5 or 6 or 7 years into retirement. You can give yourself a little bit longer runway. And for that, maybe you can stretch out your Social Security, or maybe one spouse can stretch their Social Security out while the other one claims to get a little bit higher benefit down the road. Then that other spouse can save a little bit more. There's so many small tweaks that you can make to really jumpstart. If you've ever had a stress test, I mean, just the title of it, it's like, let me turn the channel. I mean, I don't want to stress test anything. But it's important to make sure that you take a look to see, all right, if the strategies that you put together before are still in line, that the portfolio can still do it. Is the tax law changed? Is your lives changed? So this is really important to kind of take a look and start with that baseline. And I think, Al, you're right on. It's like, what are you doing now? Is this going to continue to carry you through? Then if so, by all means, you've done your job. But if not, you know, what are some things that they should be looking at?
So if you think about what your retirement baseline looks like, it doesn't have to be that complicated. So look at our example. Retirement spending here, either current or desired, $90,000, and you subtract out fixed income. In this case, it's only Social Security. Let's say that's $40,000. Very simple example. Shortfall's $50,000. So that's what you need from your portfolio each and every year. You look at your portfolio, in this case it's $1 million, all right? So you divide the shortfall into the retirement assets and you get 5%. That's what's known as your distribution rate. Now generally, we like to see that distribution rate 4% or lower. A 5% rate, Joe, sometimes depending upon what the market does or depending upon what life throws at you, could be a little bit high.
But what happens, Al, is that life gets in the way, or the markets will turn volatile on you. A volatile stock market is your best friend as I'm saving money. It's called dollar cost averaging, right? So I have a share of stock at $10 a share, but then if it drops to $5, if I'm still saving that, let's say $100 a month into my 401k plan, guess what? I just bought 2 shares, right? So I'm buying more shares when the market goes down as I'm saving money. As I take dollars out of the overall portfolio in a down market, it could be the biggest disaster. It only could be like a slight dip too. It's all about timing in some instances. Because if you lose 50% of your portfolio, hypothetically of course, and you gain 50% the next year, you don't have your money back. Right? If I lose 50% of the portfolio, you need 100% just to get your money back. And if you're taking dollars out to live off of, right, you're gonna go broke. The money will run out. So that's why having this stress test done on your portfolio is key in understanding the difference between saving money and spending, and especially in a volatile market as you're trying to create income. Let's look at how the tax brackets work. Break this down for us, because people get confused on how much tax that they're actually paying.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. So we have multiple tax brackets, starting with a 10% bracket, going all the way up to 37%. So what this is showing, and we're showing the married filing joint brackets here, what this is showing is that certain taxable income levels, this is after your itemized deduction, these are your tax rates. And the way this works is, let's say you're married and your income's $100,000. That means the first $19,750 is taxed at 10%. The next bit is taxed at 12%, and finally the last amount is taxed at 22%. So a lot of people think that once you go over into the next bracket, the whole thing is taxed at that higher bracket. That's not true. You get the lower brackets at every stage of the way.
So if you believe tax rates are going to go up, it might make sense to buy the tax rate today. Buy it cheap, because then you're buying the tax rate and moving those assets into a tax-free environment that will never ever be taxed again. Ever, right? Did I make that clear? Never again. So what are some of the strategies that you might want to look at? Is just go to the top of your bracket. So we looked at taxable income, we looked at the tax brackets, and say, all right, well, here's my taxable income. I'm in the 22% tax bracket. How much money should I convert? How much money should I take from here and move it to here? All right, well, you just go to the top of that 24% tax bracket. So if I look at here, here's the top of the 24, that's $326,000, right? That's a pretty rich person. But in this example, it's like, all right, well, I'm going to go to the top of the bracket because I want to pay that 24% rate, because I know the 24% rate is going to 28. Would I rather pay 24 or 28? Of course you would rather pay 24. Buy the tax rate cheap.
How to protect your income in retirement. And I guess the first starting point is not spending too much, right? Because if you spend too much, if you're going to live 10, 20, 30 years or longer, you need to know how much you can spend. You need to have a plan for healthcare costs, because that's one of our bigger costs as you get older. You need to protect your investments, but you also need some conservative growth, because if you're going to live a few decades, there's this thing called inflation and taxes that you got to take care of. And by doing all that, you're much more likely to be protected in retirement. And Joe, I think in a lot of cases, people have no idea what they can spend. They get to retirement age and they think, well, I got Social Security, I got pension, but I have some assets. I don't really know what to spend.
Right. I mean, that's a huge problem. You look at, if someone has $100,000, that's a lot of money, right? $100,000. But what does that equate to in income? You need a big pile of cash to equal a ton of income. So let's go through a couple of examples, because we see some of this on a daily basis, right? Let's say a couple comes in, they're looking to retire, right? They want to spend $70,000 a year. They feel pretty confident because they have about $300,000 saved. And they have some fixed income, so they're looking at $70,000. They have pensions and retirement accounts of $40,000. Hey, we're short $30,000. We have $300,000. This should last a long time. The average market return is 6 to 10%. But if I look at this distribution rate, $30,000 into 275, that's 10.9%. They're taking almost 11% out of their overall portfolio. That is way too much. A good rule of thumb, 4%, 3%, somewhere in that range. So a better plan, which is a lot harder to achieve, is this. Hey, I'm going to spend $15,000 more. Okay? That's not a ton of money. Right? They got the same pensions. Their shortfall is 45, so they're spending $15,000 more. They need 1.3 to get right in that sweet zone. So I didn't mean to depress all of you either. It's like, oh gosh, this show is terrible. I don't even have close to that. But you have to be realistic, because the last thing you want to do is go broke in retirement. You need to figure out how the math works and where your numbers fall.
That's always step one, Joe, because you got to know how much to spend. 4% is a good place to start. If you retire younger, like let's say younger than 60, you might want to think about 3% or something a little bit lower. But what does that 4% distribution rate mean? So let's say you start with $500,000 of savings. 4% of that's $20,000. So that's what we're suggesting is kind of a starting point as to perhaps what you could spend. Now that doesn't mean it stays at $20,000 each and every year. It would go up after that with inflation. And so if you figure there's 2.5% inflation, in year number 2 you're taking out $20,500. In year 3 you're taking out a little more than $21,000. So it's kind of moving up based upon inflation. Stocks tend to rise more than bonds, and at times you need to sell stocks and buy more bonds. Sometimes it's the other way when the market's going down. But here's a real quick example. January 2009 to December 2018, 10-year period. What happens if they didn't rebalance at all? Well, you can see the stocks became rather large, which is not necessarily a bad thing, except now you have a lot of stocks in your portfolio and you're taking more risk than perhaps you need to do. Now, if you had rebalanced at different points twice a year, you can see you can stay more coordinated. And this is important. You know, when you're making money, when you're saving, it's okay to have a much higher stock valuation, but when in retirement, you want to have a lot more safety so you don't have this big volatility because you're pulling money out at the same time. And so I think that's an important concept. Sometimes people have a hard time going from growth to conservative growth, and it's rebalancing is part of that.
Yeah, but also it's hard for people to do because you're selling your winners and you're buying your losers, sure. Right? Because the stock market is doing good, and you want to maintain a certain risk profile. You have to sell some of those stocks to buy bonds or to buy other asset classes that are down. So you're buying stocks that are down in value, but some people will look, I don't want to buy those because they're down in value. Well, just say it again, right? You want to buy stocks that are down in value. So it's a hard concept for people to grasp, but it will protect you against, pretty volatile times.
So cracking the code for every age. I love the topic, and there's things that you need to be thinking about and considering at every age. Right off the bat, we're going to talk about to assess your progress regardless of your age. And then number two, the best strategies, or at least the things you ought to be thinking about at each age. And then we're going to have some examples of someone that does it just right. Well, guess what? Most of us don't do it just right. So we're going to talk about what happens if you're a little bit behind. We'll go over strategies that way. And Joe, I think so many people, we can come into our office and they have no idea. Do I have enough?
Fidelity put this down, and it's a useful tool. So when you look at age 30, so if you're 30 years old, you should have, hypothetically, 1 times your salary. So 30-year-olds making $40,000 a year, well, they should have $40,000 saved for their retirement. So if we move up the ladder here, let's say at age 45, well, 45-year-olds should have roughly 4 times. So 45-year-old might be making, I don't know, just to make the math really easy, $100,000. Well, they should have $400,000 saved. So you get the gist here. So 1 times, 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, and the ladder goes up. So if you're 67, you should have 10 times. I mean, these numbers are going to get ridiculous on us here a little bit, Al. Because it's like, because that's when we got to start here, right? If you start at 30 and you move your way up, then it's a lot easier to catch up.
Well, and here's the problem. Hardly anyone starts in their 20s, right? And so we're almost all of us are catching up to some extent.
Almost all of us are behind, right?
And so I guess what I want to say here is when you look at this, don't get too discouraged. This would be an ideal scenario. And this was put out by Fidelity, and they've kind of had this for a number of years. If everything goes perfect, this is pretty good.
It's a gauge, right?
Yeah, it's a gauge. That's a good way to say it.
Am I close? Okay, if I'm not close, I need to step it up. If I can turn it down or do whatever, retire early. So, we're doing a little mini financial plan, and we've never met any of you. So there you go. Hey, let's go to Ask the Experts.
My wife and I disagree about leaving money to one of our children. I'm older than my wife, so she will likely outlive me. Is there anything that I can do to keep my son from inheriting any of my money? And that's from Anonymous. I guess, Joe, I get a sense of why they didn't want to put their name on there, because maybe their son might be watching. What do you think?
Well, that's a unique question. So, it's your money, but you want to give it to your wife, but you don't want to give it to your kid. Then you die. I don't know. If it's both of you, if it's joint, if it's separate property, that's really easy. You can put it into a separate property trust and make sure that your spouse is the beneficiary of the trust. And then from there, it could go to a charity. Let's say if you want to leave Junior out in the street. But if it's joint property, Al.
It makes it tougher. I guess one thing that they could do is set up a living trust with an A-B provision. So the A trust, the spouse has control over. The B trust is the decedent trust. Your spouse gets income, but the beneficiaries are whoever you designate. So that could be a way to do that.
That's it for us. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Big Al, great job, buddy.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
We'll see you again next week. Again, go to yourmoneyyourwealth.com.